The more perturbation your system can handle without injury, the more it can return.
What's up? 筋肉翻訳です。さあ今日は筋トレをより楽しく、より効率的にしてくれる方法、見ていきましょう。筋トレ楽しんでいますか？よりうまく効かせられたり、筋肉がパンパンになってきて成長が実感できると楽しいですよね。でもそのためには根性論だけではどうしようもないと感じたことがある人はいるのではないでしょうか。今回は T バーミーチャンネルからまいさんが関節の自由度を上げることで筋トレ効率を上げることについて話をしてくれています。まいさんの話からどうすれば筋トレ効率を上げることができるのか、それについては後半で話しているので最後まで見ていってください。早速見ていきましょう。どうぞ。
We need to change the way we talk about mobility and stability, the way we think about them. Mobility and stability are not on either end of the same spectrum. They are intricately linked, but they're not polar opposites. Mobility can present itself in stable states, and lack of mobility can actually create instability in the form of an inability to generate strength in certain positions. The opposite of mobility is hypomobility, and the opposite of stability is instability, simply put. In an ideal world, we want to be able to cover either ends of both the mobility and stability spectrum. So ideally, the end of our mobility spectrum would be more something like rigidity. So if we think about, instead of thinking about hypomobility, we're thinking about braced rigidity. Think about bracing when you want to deadlift and when you want to squat. So it's controlling and limiting mobility voluntarily, intentionally. For stability, let's think about instability rather in a positive way as adaptability. So we want to have some adaptability, so some ranges in which we can work. Okay? What do I mean by degrees of freedom? So when you think about a stable system, a system is stable if I can apply a perturbation and it will return to its unperturbed position. So it will do what it needs to do to return to its position of equilibrium. Your degrees of freedom are that area outside of your unperturbed position that's still within a recuperable vicinity of that position. So think about, if this is your unperturbed position, then these are your degrees of freedom. So you can handle a perturbation anywhere inside here and be able to come back to this position of equilibrium. The greater your degrees of freedom, the more perturbation your system can handle without injury. The more it can return, the more that recuperable vicinity is big. Okay, so that's what we mean when we talk about degrees of freedom. How do I do that practically? I need to work in my planes of adaptations. We tend to work a lot in the sagittal plane, and we need to work in our planes of adaptation, our transverse plane, our frontal plane. So what does that mean practically? The knee needs some varus and valgus stress. The spine needs to work in the planes of rotation and lateral flexion. So we need to incorporate that type of movement and be able to control that type of movement so that we maintain our degrees of freedom. So remember, mobility and stability are not at either ends of the same spectrum.
さあ、いかがでしたでしょうか？乱れのない位置に戻すことのできる自由度を増やそうということでした。ベンチプレスやダンベルプレスに例えると分かりやすいかもしれません。ここだと力発揮がうまくできるけど、ここまでずれると一気に力が入りにくくなる。むしろ肩が痛くなってしまう。そんなポジションがあると思います。これを改善するためには、こういった四条面での動きだけでなく、全額面や横断面の種目、つまりダンベルフライやショルダープレスなどトレーニング全体を通して様々な面を取り入れることで自由度を手に入れられるということですね。他にも姿勢改善ができると効率が上がって筋トレが楽しくなります。こちらの再生リストまだ見てない方は一緒に見てみてください。みんなは筋トレを楽しむためにどんなことを心がけていますか？コメント欄で教えてください。僕はより可動域を広く大腸筋に乗せるためにストレッチやマッサージを意識して行っています。最後まで見ていただいてありがとうございます。感想や動画のリクエスト、チャンネル登録お待ちしています。ではまた。I wanna look back when you're around.
I won't think twice when you're gone. Don't hesitate to call me back, 'cause I won't be there. I won't look back when you're around. I won't think twice